This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to Writer Life. Today I want to take a look at a subject that it's not one that would immediately people would think is a topic that would first spring to mind when writing a book. I speak of the topic of loss and grief. In every book that I've written, it's always been my aim to write the truth of a character. And as much as it's been wonderful to be able to explore things such as survival and battle, woodland life, or even the wilder aspects of life with a gang of girls, there is one particular topic that has appeared in all the books I've written, and that is the topic of loss. Losing people from your life is not the easiest of things to write about, as in a way, we all encounter death in some way or another, and it's very much a subject that people shy away from, because it's sad, and who wants to read books that are just riddled with sadness and tears and grief? In Heirs to the Kingdom, Robbie had to confront the loss of his father, as well as some of his group, and also Ruby, who was very, very special. And these things had a great impact on his life. In the Curio Chronicles, Abby, who once considered ending her own life, watches as Birch grieves for May, one of the residents of the care home. And it devastates her to see, and in a way understand, how much she would have hurt Bert had she gone through with it. When I considered the idea of writing Hans Cottage, I'd lost a very special person in my life, and to a degree, at that time I'd struggled to come to terms with it. At the time, no one really understood the way in which I dealt with it, and for myself, it was very internalized and difficult to speak of. And like all aspects of my life, I wanted to find a way to write about it so that it made sense to everyone else around me. Now at that time, as I began writing what became the story of Emily Montgomery and her best friend Shelley, I chose to make the book a tribute to this very special person in my life. And in doing so, I gave a lot of thought to who she was and what she believed, and how she treated other people. I wanted her spirit to be a part of the story and reflect her sense of being. And so I shared a great deal of her with Shelley and gave parts of her to Ham. I added my own experience and some of others who I'd spoken to about their particular losses. And slowly, over a great deal of time, because, I spent 6 years working on the book, my story slowly came together. Recently I was looking at my blog posts and I came across something I wrote in August of 2022, and I felt it needed to be expanded more, and so with a little extra in the way of additions, I've made it into today's episode. And so today I'm going to return to the subject of grief, loss and fantasy. One of the hardest things in life to lose is somebody who's so important that your life falls into a void of pain and inability to understand a future without this all-important person in your life. It is tragic and so difficult, as for years you've had the joy of knowing this one special person that is always there to show you their kindness and their love, and then suddenly they are gone. It happened to me, and I've spent many years trying to find a meaning within the pain I felt and the loss that I feel. This is not an easy topic to write about. How can it be? It is so sad that really, when you consider it, who really would want to read that? It's a question that I've asked myself for some time, and a few years back, as I considered this topic, whilst up to my ears in Heirs to the Kingdom and outlining a few other things I wanted to write about, I had an idea, And it was, what if I could present this story in a way that would enlighten a reader, express my feelings, and yet provide a smile and a small ray of hope to my characters. I had no idea at that moment of the kind of book I was going to write. I just felt that I needed to write it, and I needed to write it simply because at that time no one really understood how I was feeling, and I did want to express that so that others could understand it. And what began in that moment was the book that I published entitled Cottage. Now my problem was that I was tired of being told, you'll get over it, and you have to move on at some point, it's going to get better in time. And let's not forget the old one that everybody trots out at some point, which is time heals all wounds. Honestly, I think it is patronizing, and at the time it pissed me off because they had no understanding of what this felt like for me. I still had the problem that a book about the journey through grief was a pretty heavy subject to write about, and honestly I needed a book that would at least gain enough interest to sell a few copies. I wanted something that would be different and in a way special, and I wanted it to reflect the truth of what the human spirit could actually be. I sat back and I pondered this for a long time, and I thought, what should a good book really have to keep a reader enjoying the story and turning the pages? I'd written Heirs to the Kingdom, so that was not really that difficult to work out. A good story, in my opinion, needs firstly a focal character in hopefully a difficult situation. Well, I had that. A villain or two, an element of fun and cheer, and a really good plot line to bind them all up together in. Now, because I love fantasy and I needed to lighten the subject material, I introduced the secret element. And that all brought with it some magic and mystery. And with all of that, I knew I could more than likely write something that was really worth reading. For this particular story, I knew that the icing on the cake was going to be experience, and I had that. I had lived it. And so I shrouded some of my personal feelings and mixed them around with other people that I have spoken to. And I created the character of Emily Montgomery, the daughter of business tycoon John Duncan, a man who was so destroyed by his grief, he forgot his daughter was a very important part of the woman that he's lost, his wife and her mother. Emily's story was painted as tragic because in truth, I wanted this story to be about hope and the happiness that can be found in the memory of someone who we have lost. I set up the backstory of Emily losing her mother at age 4, and due to her father's breakdown, she came home every holiday to her grandmother Hannah. Hannah's cottage was not just her grandmother's home, I made it her home too, because ultimately I needed Emily to return home. I set the story up in the 20th year of Emily's life, after a life of boarding school and university, and I threw her best friend and flatmate in, Shelley. I moved them both to another city and gave Emily the job of working for a man devoid of all compassion. And I sat down and I began to write the passing of her grandmother, who was the only real family she had ever really known, as her grandmother Han had raised her through every school holiday since age 4. And I had the perfect start to what I hoped would be a good story. I began what I hoped would be the story of the journey that takes us through the process of grief, and also that one answers that one question, which is what comes next. Nobody really knows what the afterlife is all about. I mean, how could we? In order to know, we must end our life here. Now, religion has a few variations, and other people have their own personal spiritual views, as do I. But what I wanted was something plausible, something that to a degree held a truth. The way I thought at the time of writing was that I understand that everyone has a different idea and a different spiritual belief. But what I wanted was to create a storyline that, no matter what people may believe, what I wrote in some way would resonate with them, and even to a degree fit into their own concept of life and loss. My readers know within Heirs to the Kingdom I took mythology and history, and I blurred the lines a little to create something that was more believable, if not also a little bit romanticized. And I wanted to do the same thing here. My problem was the topic I wanted to use was science. And then I could have enter the best friend and paranormal investigator and lover of folklore, who was actually terrified of ghosts. Well, a smile helps keep and break the tension. The greatest thing about science is that it's theory. Until, of course, it's disproven, it's considered fact. And once disproven, the theory changes. I mean, let's be honest. Talk about an invite to really blur the lines, which happens to be one of my favourite things to do. And it instantly occurred to me, one could use the same approach to spirits in mythology. It was like a eureka moment, and my brain spun out of control as I realised, what is the one thing that baffles everybody and drives scientists into meltdown? Because there's no credible evidence. It cannot be proven. Everybody wants to believe there is this somewhere, and that, of course, is magic. Scientists hate it. They constantly dismiss it, and the same goes for ghosts, spooks, and all manner of the spirit world. They blatantly refuse to accept it because there's no credible evidence. That just felt like an invite for me to join in the game. I posed the question, what if there was another intelligent life form? And what if it learned from the humans and decided that they were just far too dangerous to interact with? Okay, so I spiraled for a while into conspiracy theories, but I still asked the question, is Loch Ness really a myth? Could a Yeti or Bigfoot really exist and not be discovered? Now, scientists always tell us there's no credible evidence. Well, if that is the case, why do so many people believe them? Okay, so yeah, I'll admit it, I was playing devil's advocate, but hey, I'm a writer, that's what I do. It appeared to me conspiracy is a little like science theory. It's actually a fact until it is disproved. And that sounds like magic to me. I knew I could take something wonderful and work it into the story, and in doing so I would return to what is one of my favourite aspects of reading and writing. I could throw in a lot of fantasy, and boy have I done that. Enter the new characters Felix and Esme, and probably one of the best aspects of so many fairy stories from the past. As children, we read these tales, and we all to some degree believe in fairies at some point in our life. Just take the example of the Tooth Fairy, or even the elves that help Santa. Tinkerbell has grown into a multi-million-pound business for Disney. I think there's a small part in every adult, and if they're actually honest, they still remember all those tales of fairies from their childhood. And even though they were forced to grow up, there is a small part of many who deep down inside, they want fairies to be real. And with that in mind, I was determined to find a way to bring them back to life and prove that they actually exist. As I started to write, I knew I had something special. I mean, yes, it had sadness and a few moments that would make a reader take a breath and swallow hard. But it also had joy. Oh, it had such joy. Emily, I made an ecologist and staunch believer in science. And then I added the one thing she would never expect, the one thing she could never actually accept. And I rolled them up into the most wonderful and beautiful secret, and I made it the life of her recently deceased grandmother Ham. I set all of this to a background of beautiful untouched wilderness, and then I made Emily the sole owner and person responsible for everything. And it was her task to discover the secret of her grandmother's beautiful and enchanting life, and all whilst having her terrified ghost-hunting friend at her side. VCP wrote the synopsis for the book, which I cannot deny, I felt was very fitting, and it described the book beautifully. They wrote, Emily Montgomery Duncan lost her mother at age 4. Her father fell apart. Emily ended up in boarding school. In her holidays she came home to her grandma Ham, and the only real home she ever knew. Shortly before her 21st birthday, the call came. Hannah had passed away, and her whole world collapsed. Shortly after the funeral, Emily discovers that she has inherited the cottage and all of the land around. Not her aunt as she expected, but the thought of living in the cottage without Ham is so unbearable, she spends a year lost, alone, and torn into pieces, as her uncle constantly tries to push her into selling the cottage and all of the land to him, driving her to breaking point. In a moment of anger, supported by her best friend Shelley, Emily decides to return, and as she confronts her life without Han, she discovers Han had a very secret life, one she could never imagine. What follows is an enchanting, magical fantasy story of wonder and beauty, as Robin John Morgan has created a delightful fairy story for grown-ups that looks at life, loss, and the magic that surrounds all of us in a thrilling and captivating way that is a joy to read. An amazing book from the author of Heirs to the Kingdom, Rise of the Raven, and the Curio Chronicles. My wife was, as always, the first to read it, and she absolutely has fallen in love with it, which was a massive relief for me. This is a special story for me. It's almost sacred, as I've given Emily a great deal of my own experience. I mean, not all of it, but a really good measure. In many ways, I feel the book has a slight innocence to it, which just adds to the enchantment of the story. I've only ever wanted to be taken seriously as a writer of stories, and I hope that with this book, I can add more weight to that, and people start to understand that I may still be a relatively unknown writer, but I'm really dedicated to the kinds of stories that I want to share. I like my stories to reflect the truth. Heirs to the Kingdom did it, as it highlighted the truth of the immorality we see in the world. The Curio Chronicles, whilst blatant and in your face at times, also highlighted the power of victimizing and shaming. So with this book, I wanted to highlight the power and depth of the human spirit. I want readers to see how powerful our feelings can be, and yet how fragile they are at times, and how that can make all of us feel. I also wanted, as I have in everything that I write, to show how powerful and important friendship is, and how it can shape our life in such wonderful ways. Shelley is a massively important character, and I had a lot of fun with her because she was a figure of ridicule at times, and yet her belief in all things mystical, I felt, gave her a great deal of credit. Using science to explain the unbelievable was not as easy as it appears in the book. For those parts of the book, I had to return to my own studies to brush up on aspects of physics, archaeology, and anthropology. It was actually great fun putting together her arguments and making them sound credible, or at least put things in such a way that I hoped that just for a moment the reader would think about her point of view and be swayed just a little bit, as her case was not completely unsound and was indeed a little bit plausible. The idea of a paradox and the concept of what is in the box is either real or fake, I think really paid off. And I did wonder when I was writing those parts if I would to a degree pull it off and maybe bring back some of those wonderful beliefs in fairies that the adults reading it had as small children. Another very important aspect, apart from the fairy story aspect, was also the turmoil of Emily. Children lose their way, and they can form impressions that are based solely on their own little viewpoint. And again, I felt that there was another story to tell here within the story of Hannah. Emily's not had such a great time, and I felt that she had to a degree isolated herself and clung to this concept of Hannah being the only real family life that she knew. I've spoken with so many people who have had problems in their adult life which are based on concepts they formed as children. So I knew I could weave that through the plot of the story. Emily felt abandoned as a child, and so therefore she saw her father as disinterested and unfeeling. And yet, just like her conversations with Shelley, Emily sees a clash in her own narrative. Hannah's talked all her life about how caring and loving her mother was. So in Emily's mind, there is a conflict, because she cannot as a young woman understand how her mother could have loved a man who she sees as cold and aloof. It felt to me like this was an important aspect of the story, because in my mind, I saw Emily's return to Hans' cottage as also a kind of a turning of the page and closing of the book on the life she had lived. And it was time to reset her life and come to terms with everything. Hans' passing was not just about facing a life in the cottage alone. It was also about facing herself and challenging her own belief systems, not just in fairies, but also her concepts about her father, her relatives, and also how for so long she'd lived in a darkness that she created in her own mind. The story of Frank was very much the vehicle that I used to convey this. His blind, utter belief that it was all right for Emily to talk to Hannah and her mother, as he did, for his wife. But it was also all right to continue to live whilst doing so. It really helped Emily move forward. Now, when Frank stopped coming to the park, Emily was yet again forced to continue her life. For a time, Frank had filled an important empty space within Emily, and he had, to a degree, given her the chance to vocalize her feelings. And without realizing, Frank started her process of opening up and starting to face her future by talking through it. When Frank disappeared, Emily had to change her day, and as a result, she continued. But rather than sit with Frank and talk, she had to make that adjustment of silently saying hello to him, but continuing on with her life. It was, in a way, a symbolic moment in her life that pointed the way forward, and to a degree, it helped Emily to make the decision to return to the cottage. I've asked myself, if Emily had not had Frank, would she ever have returned to the cottage? There is so much to unpack reading this book. I'm quite certain that it should be read at least a couple of times, although I actually do know now of one reader who's told me that they've read it 6 times, which for myself as the author is such a wonderful and amazing thing to know. My aim was always to provide food for thought. Life is such a very precious gift, and yet a great many people do not really understand that, and they idle it away with no thought at all. The loss of Han, like the loss that I suffered, it came so quickly. It caught me completely off guard and unprepared, and it reinforced my belief that we need to really make the most of our time alive. Many people lose hope in their lives, and when that happens, they become blinded to the reality that surrounds them, and in many cases, they just simply stop living. Pain is a part of the process of healing, so is anger or self-doubt, but they're not a place to live. It is important to take the time to work through it all. Now, for some, that can be a relatively short space of time, but for others, it is a longer process, and everyone really should understand that. It's alright to move on and remember. I would even say it is vital, but life does continue, not as it was, and that starts with one step forward, and that can be a really sad one. It does not need to be filled with cheer. The biggest and clearest message I feel within this book is that love is eternal. It does not leave us, and no matter how dark it may get, we can remember the love and how that felt, and then cherish it as we move forward through life. And I really hope that my readers discovered that. What you believe and how you deal with loss and grief is actually all that is really important. It matters not what others think, because this is your life, and you will move in your own way. And that is not just an important lesson for loss. I would think it's the most important message of life. I wanted Hans Cottage to be a book about healing, about positivity, and also the wonder of the human spirit and the hope that lies within it. And in doing this, I would hope that it has helped people to discover more of who they are, and they've gained a better understanding of themselves, because I've been through that writing it. Hans Cottage, I hope, will do all of the above, and I hope that yes, if it does choke you up at times, you will also smile, because the hope and optimism that runs through every page is there to show every reader that no matter what, we can still love, we can always remember, and we can cherish every second of our magical lives. As always, I really do hope you enjoy this book, and I thank every one of you who has played a part in supporting my writing life by reading it. Hans Cottage is available in digital and print formats, and I hope if you've not read it, you would take a few moments and consider it, and hopefully read it and learn something that helps you from it. My thanks, as always, to everyone who has patiently sat and listened to this podcast. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who supports my writing life. And if you like what you hear and you want to have a look at the books and you do read them and enjoy them, then please always remember, writers need talkers. So if you do like the books, please look me up on social media and put a comment or a like, share a post, and spread the word so that I can let other people see how much the books that I write are enjoyed by other people, because it does make a huge difference. If you buy a book on one of the platforms that sells books, please, if you can, just take 2 minutes, add a review, give it a few star ratings, and then that way I can help sort of reach a lot of other people and get my work more widely circulated. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and again, that will help me to reach a much wider audience so that I can share my stories with them. I'm super grateful to absolutely everybody who has supported my writing life, and I had a bit of a cold when I recorded this one because I did actually record it back in January this year, so it's a bit deeper than normal. These things happen when you've got a weekly podcast to put out, but again, if you've listened, thank you very, very much, and I'll be back next week and peeling back the layers of another aspect of the many stories that I've written to date. Thank you to everyone who's listened, and I will see you all soon.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below. And please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.